The orbital academy hung suspended above the swirling amber storms of Kepler-4, 4-2b's largest gas giant. A monument to galactic unity, constructed from crystalline alloys that refracted starlight into prismatic corridors. Inside Lecture Hall 7, 43 sentient beings from 19 different species sat in magnetically suspended pods, their attention fixed on Instructor Velkarn, as he gestured toward the entrance with one of his 4 articulated limbs. "Class, we have a transfer student joining us today," Velkarn announced. His voice modulated through the universal translator embedded in the room's walls. "She comes from a recently contacted world. Designation, Terra. Classification, ... Double quotes, he paused, mandibles clicking with what might have been amusement. Deathworld, Class 12. A ripple of chittering laughter spread through the chamber. A Deathworld, one of those barbaric planets where evolution had gone catastrophically wrong, producing creatures that survived through sheer biological absurdity rather than intelligence or grace. The assembled students Seligan Sinari, with their luminescent skin, towering Krethic, with their crystalline exoskeletons, fluid Morphine who shifted between states of matter exchanged knowing glances. This would be entertaining. The girl who walked through the doorway stood barely 5.5 feet tall. Her skin was a pale tan, her frame slight compared to the armored bulk of the Krethic, or the sinuous length of the serpentine delegates. She wore the standard academy uniform, but it hung on her like she'd borrowed it from someone more impressive. Her eyes brown, unremarkable, scanned the room once, before she moved to the empty pod. Velkarn indicated, with a dismissive wave. "Your designation?" Velkarn asked, though his tone suggested he didn't particularly care. "Maya Torres. Sir. Miss Torres comes from a world with a gravitational constant of 9.8 meters per second squared." Velkarn continued, turning back to his primary students. "Atmospheric oxygen content of 21%, and a surface that experiences what they call weather." More laughter. "I trust you'll all make her feel accommodated to civilized standards." The lecture resumed. Velkarn spoke of quantum field manipulation, of the mathematics that allowed faster-than-light travel, of concepts that had taken the galactic community 12,000 years to perfect. Maya sat silently in her pod, occasionally making notes on her datapad. She didn't raise her hand, didn't ask questions, didn't give Velkarn the satisfaction of confusion he'd been anticipating. That silence grated on him more than ignorance would have. By the third day, when she answered a complex equation correctly before he'd finished writing it, his irritation had crystallized into something darker. Primitives didn't show up their instructors. Not in his classroom. "Miss Torres," he said during the 4th session, his tone sharp enough to cut through the ambient hum of the lecture hall's environmental systems. "Perhaps you'd like to demonstrate your understanding of gravitational lensing at the board." She stood without hesitation, moving to the holographic display at the front of the room. Her fingers moved through the light-based interface with surprising precision, building a 3-dimensional model of a neutron star, bending space-time around it. The math checked out perfectly. Velkarn felt his primary stomach churn. "Adequate," he said dismissively. "Though your notation is crude. On advanced worlds, we use the same notation," Maya said quietly, still facing the display. "Your equation set is based on the Kerr metric, developed by a human mathematician in 1963. The classroom went silent. Azanari students' bioluminescence flickered with second-hand embarrassment. Velkarn's mandibles locked rigid. "Return to your seat." Maya complied, her expression neutral. But as she passed Velkarn's elevated platform, he reached out with one of his secondary arms, the gesture meant to be corrective, instructional. A light tap to the shoulder, the kind of physical redirection any instructor might use with a student who'd overstepped. His padded limb made contact with her upper arm, barely enough force to register on his own sensory organs. Maya didn't flinch, didn't react at all. She simply continued to her pod and sat down. Velkarn opened his mouth to continue the lecture. The words caught in his throat. His arm felt strange. The limb he'd touched her with had gone numb, but not in the way of interrupted circulation. It felt hollow, as though the neural pathways had been scraped clean. He tried to flex his digits. They twitched spasmodically, jerking in directions his brain wasn't commanding. Instructor, a Krethic student in the front row, leaned forward, its crystalline features refracting concern. "Your biohithm indicator is fluctuating." Velkarn looked down at his own body. The environmental suit's built-in medical readouts were flashing amber along his thorax. Heart rate had 3 elevated and arrhythmic. Respiratory efficiency dropping. Core temperature spiking. He tried to speak, managed only a wet clicking sound as his primary lungs seized. 10 seconds had passed since contact. His legs buckled. The magnetic stabilizers in his teaching platform caught him before he hit the floor, but the damage was done. Every student pod in the room swiveled toward him as alarm klaxons began shrieking from the medical monitoring systems embedded in the walls. Velkarn's vision tunneled, his multiple eyes losing focus as his nervous system staged a cascading revolt against itself. Maya sat perfectly still in her pod, hands folded in her lap. The emergency medical drones arrived within 30 seconds, their anti-gravitational motors whining as they swarmed around Velkarin's convulsing form. One extended a diagnostic filament into the base of his skull, while another injected a cocktail of universal stabilizers into his primary circulatory system. The lead drone's holographic display painted the air above Velkarn in scrolling crimson text that made the nearest students recoil. Neural feedback cascade. Origin point. Right secondary limb. Massive neurotransmitter disruption. Muscular tissue, showing signs of electromagnetic trauma, consistent with high-voltage exposure. Patient entering shock. But he only touched a morphine student's gaseous form contracted sharply. He barely touched the human. The medical drones lifted Velkarn's body onto a hovering gurney, already flooding his system with enough sedatives to tranquilize a Krithik battle drone. As they maneuvered toward the exit, one of the drones paused, its scanning array focusing on Maya with the cold precision of a targeting computer. Terran biology detected. Standard physiological readings. No elevated stress indicators. No aggressive hormones present. The drone's optical sensor dilated, as though surprised by its own findings. Subject appears. .com. Maya looked up, meeting the drone's sensor array with those unremarkable brown eyes. When she spoke, her voice carried through the silent lecture hall with perfect clarity. You hit a Deathworlder. That was your first mistake. The drones departed with their cargo. The class sat frozen, each student suddenly aware of the small human girl sitting among them, unchanged and unbothered. An elegant Senari named Salantha, whose species prided itself on diplomatic acumen, finally found her voice. What? What did you do? Nothing. Maya's response was matter-of-fact. He touched me. My body responded. It's not conscious. It's not aggressive. It just is. Responded how? Demanded a Krethik, whose name translated as something like stone that speaks. Maya was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. Earth isn't like your worlds. It didn't evolve intelligence as a primary survival trait. It evolved violence, efficiency, lethality. Every organism on my planet exists in a state of permanent warfare against predators, against prey, against the environment itself. Your gravity is barely half what I'm used to. Your atmospheric pressure makes me feel like I'm in a decompression chamber. The background radiation you consider dangerous. I've experienced worse from standing outside on a sunny day. She stood, and several students flinched backward in their pods. Maya didn't seem to notice. Humans have an involuntary nervous system response to physical threats. When Velkarn touched me, my body interpreted it as an attack. It generated an electromagnetic pulse through my muscle fibers, something we evolved to deter predators that hunted by bioelectric sensing. It happens in milliseconds. I can't control it any more than you can control your digestive processes. His nervous system wasn't built to handle that feedback. Ours evolved specifically to weaponize it. That's Salantha's luminescence flickered through several colors associated with distress. That's horrifying. That's Tuesday, Maya corrected. Do you know what the most dangerous creature on Earth is? It's not the apex predators. It's the microscopic ones. Bacteria that can eat through metal. Viruses that rewrite genetic code. Parasites that hijack neural systems. We carry thousands of species of foreign organisms in our bodies at all times, and we've learned to coexist with them. Our immune systems wage wars every second that would sterilize most species in this room. She gestured toward the medical readout still glowing in the air, where the drones had been. Instructor Velkarn will recover. His species has redundant systems, which is good. But he needs to understand something you all need to understand. Humans didn't choose to be this way. We're not violent by preference. We're violent by necessity. And we've spent 10,000 years learning to control it, suppress it, redirect it into art and philosophy and science. Maya sat back down, her movements careful and controlled. So when you look at me and see something small and weak, remember, I come from a world where the children have to be taught not to kill things by accident, where we have to actively train ourselves not to break objects we handle. where our own planet tries to murder us with weather patterns that would collapse your civilizations. The classroom remains silent for a long moment. Then Stone that speaks, his crystalline voice resonating with something that might have been respect, asked, "Why did they send you here? To this academy?" Maya's expression softened slightly. "Because humanity wants to join the galactic community. Because we're trying to prove we can be more than survivors. Because every species here earned their place through overcoming their world's challenges." She paused. "We just had harder challenges to overcome." 3 days later, Velkarn returned to teach. His right secondary arm hung in a regenerative sleeve, and he kept precisely 6 feet of distance between himself and every student. When Maya answered a question correctly, he simply nodded and moved on. Word spread through the academy, like radiation through a thin hull. The human girl became a curiosity, then a subject of study, then something approaching reverence. Students who'd mocked her now gave her space in corridors. Faculty who'd dismissed her began reviewing Earth's data files, with new appreciation for what Deathworld Class 12 actually meant. In advanced combat theory, a Krethic named Stonebreaker challenged her to a practical demonstration. Confident his armored exoskeleton would protect him, Maya tried to decline. The instructor insisted. Combat protocols were activated, protective fields engaged. Stonebreaker charged. Maya sidestepped with impossible fluidity, her movements economical and precise. The Krethic's momentum carried him past her, and as he turned to attack again, she simply placed her palm against his thorax and pushed. Not hard, just enough to make contact. Stonebreaker's nervous system registered the touch as a threat. His own muscles locked, interpreting the electromagnetic pulse from her hand as a predator strike. He collapsed mid-step, his exoskeleton clattering against the training floor, limbs spasming as his brain tried to reboot neural connections that had been temporarily scrambled. Maya hadn't thrown a punch, hadn't used force. She'd just touched him. The combat instructor, a grizzled morphine veteran of 3 territorial wars, stared at the convulsing Krethic, then at the human girl, standing calm and apologetic in the center of the training circle. "How?" the instructor demanded. "Are you people not extinct?" "We almost were," Maya said quietly, helping the medical drones stabilize Stonebreaker. "Several times. Ice ages, volcanic winters, plague, predation. But we survived because we evolved to be harder to kill than anything trying to kill us. Eventually, we ran out of natural predators. So we became our own." The instructor absorbed this. "Your species weaponized itself against itself. We had to learn cooperation or die. Turns out, when your options are work together or extinction, you get pretty good at teamwork." Maya smiled slightly. "It only took us a few 100,000 years." By the end of the term, Maya was offered a position as a junior instructor in hostile environment survival. Not because she was the smartest student, though her scores were exceptional. Not because she was the strongest, though her physical capabilities were now the subject of 3 separate research papers. She was offered the position because the Academy recognized something fundamental. If you wanted to teach students how to survive the galaxy's worst conditions, you asked someone from a world where survival was the default state of existence. At the graduation ceremony 6 months later, Velkarn stood at the podium, his right secondary arm fully healed. When Maya's name was called graduating with honors in xenobiology and tactical philosophy, he was the first to activate his applause emitters. As Maya crossed the stage, Velkarn spoke quietly. Words meant only for her. "I apologize. For my assumptions. For my arrogance." Maya paused, meeting his compound eyes. "Apology accepted. For what it's worth, you helped me understand something too." "What's that?" "That humanity's strength isn't violence. It's the choice not to use it. Every day, every human walks around with the capacity to cause incredible harm. And every day, we choose not to. That's the real achievement." She accepted her diploma and walked to the edge of the stage. Looking out at the assembled graduates, 42 species represented, countless worlds, infinite diversity. When she spoke, her voice carried through the translation systems to reach every ear, antenna, and sensory organ in the auditorium. Humanity is peaceful by choice. We're kind by decision. We're cooperative by necessity. But never, ever mistake those choices for weakness. We survived the death world. We're what evolution builds when it runs out of ways to kill you. Remember that. And remember that we're choosing to be here, with you, as friends. The applause was thunderous, generated by methods as varied as the species present. Later, as the ceremony concluded and the graduates dispersed, Maya stood at an observation port, looking down at the gas giant below, its storms raging in perpetual chaos. Beyond it, impossibly far but always present in her mind, was a small blue marble experiencing its own storms, its own chaos, its own relentless hostility. A Zanari student approached Silantha, now sporting the insignia of a diplomatic corps candidate. "Will you go back to Earth?" Maya smiled. "Eventually, but not yet. There's a whole galaxy that needs to understand us, and a whole species of humans who need to understand them. Someone has to build those bridges. Is it hard, being the ambassador for a death world every day?" Maya's reflection in the observation port looked tired but determined. "But my people didn't survive by taking the easy path. We survived by taking the necessary one." Below them, the gas giants' storms continued their ancient dance, beautiful, violent, and utterly indifferent. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, Earth spun on, still trying to kill everything that lived on its surface, still producing creatures stubborn enough to thrive anyway. Deathworld Class 12. Where evolution built survivors. Where nature forged warriors. Where humanity learned to be gentle in a universe that had taught them nothing but violence. And somewhere in the Academy's medical wing, Instructor Velkan pulled up the xenobiology file on Terrence one more time, reading the warning label at the top, "With new understanding. Caution. Deathworld biology. Handle with extreme care. Physical contact may result in involuntary defensive response. Species is cognizant of danger and will warn you. Heed all warnings. They survived their planet. They can survive you." He closed the file and laughed a chittering, clicking sound that expressed something between fear and admiration. The primitives had arrived, and the galaxy would never be quite the same.